Hello and welcome to the King Heroes Journey podcast. My name is Beth Martins. That was a little bit of a rocky start there. It's about 600 little buttons to push on the way to that. Since I added my intro, I wanted to say that is actually my... Oh, there we go. And an echo. Okay, there we go. The last thing. All right, so I want to say that is my son playing. That was... his guitar playing a song called the Quintuplet Meditation. And so I've been getting him to work for me a little bit in the back end and provide some intro and outro. That's my professional take at that. Still getting some bugs worked out, let's say. So welcome, Simran. I'm so glad to host you today for this interview, where we're going to talk about the art of change agency. And this is one of the rare interviews that I'm doing that has come about purely through synchronicity. There's always some element of synchronicity and, a lot, but there's usually some kind of a lead or a reason or a something. And I was in a rabbit hole one night and I came across an interview of you. And then I looked at your website and I heard various things that you were saying. And I think the main reason why I resonated with you was your work on the Rebel Road and expressing a number of different transformations that you've been through in your life, which really is the domain of that rebel archetype, which is a big part of my world, working with archetypes and helping people to deprogram them. And for those of you that don't know Simran, because it might be the case in my world here, I'm just going to read her bio. So she's the host of 1111 Talk Radio, the publisher of 1111 Magazine, and is a multiple Gold-award winning author, artist, speaker, and mystic of love, compassion, and humanity. She writes books, online courses, digital and audio media to assist in bridging humanity's experience and expression of darkness and light. As the 1111 lady, a love catalyst and rebel humanitarian, Simran advocates for the visionary and mystic within, so that greater balance, neutrality, compassion, and peace arise in our inner and outer worlds. So welcome, Simran. I'm so glad to have you here.
Oh, Beth, thank you so much for having me. I'm looking forward to our conversation and how all the dots connect, because I'm sure they will.
Indeed. Yeah, we're going to see how that mystery unfolds. And so do you want to take a few minutes and just let us know maybe a little bit of your background, how you got into this role that you're in right now, how things unfolded? I know you have an interesting, I'm not sure exactly where you're from, but you mentioned in one of your writings that you had an arranged marriage. I was very curious about that. So if you'd like, just share anything that you like right now.
Yes, I'll start first by talking about signs, because that really is what allowed my own personal growth path to unfold in the way that it did. Sign symbols and synchronicity are, to me, the most powerful personal growth curriculum any of us could allow into our lives. And we can use the example of how the show began and different symbols that have already shown up on the show since we have come together through synchronicity. And so, when I see certain things happen, they always have a meaning. And so we had kind of a false start in the beginning of the show where we were to go live and then we didn't go live. And that to me is symbolic of where many people are in the world right now, where perhaps we feel like I didn't get my real start in the world. I didn't get to really be who I came here to be. And we have to understand that those false starts allow us to have do-overs like we did. And then we can come to life in the world that we are intended to. And the way that we do that is very much symbolized by your son and the music that he created and what's in the background of us. Because what is in the background of all of us is that inner child, that inner genius, the one that has the music and the harmony radiating from us that we are not listening to, and yet is trying to come through and be the background force throughout our entire experience. And so that was beautifully symbolic to have that come in. And then the fact that you talk about archetypes and about the rebel, that is so much what we are each called to do in this particular lifetime, is to go against the grain, go against the conformity that we have fallen into, even go against perhaps our familial and social and religious upbringings, so that we really go back to the true nature that we are, the true essence that we are. And that's really how my own journey began, because I very much followed our cultural traditions. I was the one in the family that followed the arranged marriage. I was the one that tried to be the good girl and do everything that the parents wanted. And allowing myself to conform to those traditions kept taking me away from the true essence that my soul came here to be. And the way that life showed me that is it brought forward a lot of alternative blessings in my life. Those bumps and challenges and conflicts and places of darkness and death that show up in the world as experience were kind of pummeling me in my life, and I couldn't understand why. And at the very same moment, when I started to ask why, the signs and symbols started to show up, and they led me on a journey to open more and more to myself and to really be devoted to the journey of the soul, which is really my true mission on this planet, is to allow the soul the experience that it desires to have the highest expression it can to fulfill its own mission. And the Rebel Road was very much a part of that. That was a real breaking free of the past, of saying, this is who I have been, this is who I know myself to be. But what about all the parts of me that I don't know yet? If the divine lives within me, just as the divine exists within everyone else, what are all the gifts, skills, and talents, the expressions, and the ownership that I have not yet realized within myself? And am I willing to love myself enough to go out in the world and give that to me, to have that level of sacredness, and I would even say sacred selfishness, to say, unless I love myself first, unless I get to truly know me and all that is me, how can I really be of any service to anyone in this world? And so that really has allowed a lot to unfold thereafter, much of which has been incredible light, but also had to go through the wormhole of darkness to discover that real true light. And that has brought me to some very unique understandings about life that are often quite opposite of what many personal growth or spiritual teachers might say in their own right, but they have come through my own experience. And so I look for the subtle in life, and that is what I have found.
Nice. That's beautiful. I love that. Yeah, lots of little threads to pick up on there. When you say that you might be opposite to the other spiritual traditions, which part of it do you think is opposite? Is it the going through the wormhole of darkness or anything else?
Well, I think when I look at the world, I see a lot of people telling individuals to be more of who they are. And that is actually a trap, because the ego and the mind will take that and run with it. And oftentimes it's also, that you have to go share your voice, and you have to go do this, and you have to go do that. And we have fallen into a society right now that is all about identity, and it's all about the followers, and it's all about the image I can portray. And that is actually the opposite of what we're supposed to be doing. To be more of who we truly are actually means being less of who we are in
Mhm.
this identity sense, because the infinite is so much more. And when we really hone in on an identity and we kind of beat that into everyone else's consciousness that that's who we are actually pigeonholing ourselves and narrowing our own personal power and presence. And so I try to tell people, rather than the ego using you to get what the wounded child wanted, we are here to have the ego serve the higher self and rise into the divine child and express from that place of wholeness and detachment instead. And that means going through a lot of the veils that we have created within ourselves that shroud us in the darkness we can't see.
Nice. I love that. Yeah, in the world that I'm working in right now and helping people to do this work, I believe the roads pretty much all get to the same place. I don't like to use the expression Rome anymore just because it's so loaded. But my process is all of elimination. It's not adding anything. It's and when people talk about there's in this say truth and freedom space, for lack of a better way to call it, there's a lot of talk about programming, and it's true, we are programmed from the earliest age, both from outside and within ourselves. And then sometimes they talk about the need to reprogram and set the course straight, whether that's with the ego or any other element. I tend not to name very much, just because I'm like you. I've gone from my own direct experience, and there's a lot of academic concepts that I just simply don't find, and they're not there, so I'm not going to talk about them like they're real. And yeah, so it's like a sculpture in the wood, that it's there. There's nothing missing from it, but to remove things. And I love how you're zeroing in on the identity, because that's in the scale of emotion that I teach. It's in the realm of pride or persona, where we've always been in worlds where we had to be a particular persona in order to get by, right? So we went along to get along, and then people forget that they're wearing a persona because it's so subtle and it's like right there on your face. So there's no ready access to actually seeing that, and then letting it go is not even a question. How could you let go of what especially can feel like exactly who you are?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. I originally was in the world of fashion. I
Okay.
was a fashion designer, and I also worked in merchandising in fashion. So much of my earlier life, before I got into writing spiritual books and inspiration and personal growth, was in that realm of patterns and color. And the thing that fashion really correlates to this is, when we have these identities or these personas you're talking about, it really is like getting up and putting on an outfit. We are literally putting on a suit or a dress or a coat every day we walk out. And with certain people, we'll wear a certain type of clothing, and with other people, we'll wear a different type of clothing. But when we come home, we have to undress. And what I want people to get to is the bare naked, undressed part of them, the part of them that doesn't have to put on the show, that doesn't have to express in a certain way out of a need to be liked or loved, the part of ourselves that is just pure essence. And my pathway to that was really about deconditioning. So, like you said, we've all been conditioned. It's natural, it's what happens. We come into a family, we take on their views, their thoughts. We are the sponges that soak up their emotions, and we become shaped in this world to express a certain way. But there hit these moments in our lives, and I talk a lot about this in my book, Conversations with the Universe, where we have these moments, these ages that are like doorways that we can walk through that help us remember who we are. And we either walk through those doorways or we create another sign that happened at the beginning of the show was you were hearing an echo. And I use that word a lot because echoes to me are simply reverberations of experience. It's when something that we missed has to be heard again and again and again. And so I try to tell people that when you turned 11 years old, there was something that happened in your world that gave you this opportunity to say, I'm going to remember who I am. I'm feeling it. Or I'm going to decide to go to sleep and kind of venture down a path because there's some experience I want, or I want to try out this costume and I'm going to wear it. And that moment that happened at age 11 was either something like a divorce, perhaps someone passed away. It might have been a move. It could have been the birth of another sibling. It was something that would be kind of normal in our world, but it hit you in such a powerful way that it had you pause. And that pause either had you suppress emotionally and decide to go into your shadow, or it had a moment of awakening that said, wait, this is not who I am. I'm going to be who I am. And we receive the echoes of that moment every double-digit year of our life. And so when you turn 22 and 33 and 44, and we go on up until we choose that moment where we say, I really am going to consciously begin to observe my unconsciousness so that I can decondition that and step back into the bare naked essence that I am. And it doesn't necessarily happen instantaneously. It too then is a journey because we are here as experience experiencing itself. You are not on a journey, you are that journey. And so it's about embracing every step of the way and all that deconditioning entails so that you can get back to that essential nature. And when you look at these age stages, you'll find that most people have that sudden question of who am I? Why am I here? Usually around age 33. And that is something that is just pre-encoded. It's a trigger inside of our cellular structure. So there is a certain part of us in our chemical makeup and in our own architecture that allows for these openings and these awakenings to happen. What we have to do is get out of the head and get more into the body and the heart and the feeling of things so that we can really understand why these have shown up on the visceral level rather than thinking our way through it or trying to put words and meaning to sensations and feeling when all we're really here to do is feel and sensate.
Oh, so interesting. Hello, Janet. Nice to see you. Yeah, that was a really big topic so I'll give you a little bit of background. We're just getting to know each other. And so I studied in India with a white bearded guru on a mountain. I went 8 times. I was a kind of a nut for that. And I was really devoting my life to the practice of meditation. And yoga wasn't even really a thing in those days. It was, just starting to come up into the yoga center on every corner of the street. And it was a lot of that same message about that in my case, and I'm not projecting this onto you, but that the mental realm is bad and the spiritual realm is good. And so that, that's to a certain point, but it's kind of like saying, oh, the ego's bad, get rid of that, it sucks, get away from it. To me, that's the same thing that you might say about your eyes or your ears or your hands or another, installation that is hardwired into our system. And I noticed how when things really shifted in 2020 in an accelerated way, it wasn't really new what was happening. It was just a much more blatant, massive move by who I nickname the controllers. They don't really control everything. They just are trying to control everything. And then, the degree to which the mental faculty had been maybe completely abandoned And and that balance had been lost, and people couldn't necessarily think their way out of a paper bag, and couldn't see basic logic, couldn't just add up 1 plus 1 and come up with 2, because of the messaging that was coming their way, that was causing them maybe to evacuate their mental faculties and their emotional felt experience at the same time. So you become this evacuated being, you become empty in the wrong way, in more of like a dissociated, you're not there anymore. And it makes you so super vulnerable, like you said, with children. You just sponge in everybody's feelings and thoughts and beliefs, to a point and to a degree. So some of us came with more of a rebel spirit and an ability to question things, and there's maybe 20% of the population that can't be hypnotized. And I'll put my hand up with that one. That kind of stuff placebos don't work on me. Even when I don't believe in something, it can still work because it's true, or it's right in its timing. And so yeah, I love what you say about you're not on a journey, you are the journey. That's very beautiful. I'm definitely going to be quoting you on that one. And that age of 11 and the 22 and the 33 and the 44, I'm actually 55, going to be 56 fairly soon. So here I am in the 11 year. And what was it for you that you noticed at that, if there's anything that you haven't shared yet, for yourself as an 11-year-old? Because I'm really brought back to that time of my life as well.
I had different experiences once I began the process of deconditioning and looking back in different ways at things. And I came upon this understanding, not just of the number 11, but also the number 7, as being deeply spiritual numbers and deeply impactful in our own personal growth journeys, because we grow in 7-year cycles. And that 0 to 7-year-old is when we are that sponge. We take in the energy that's around us. We take on the emotions of our mother in the womb. We take on the ancestry that comes from there. We take on the feelings and the emotions of our father from 0 to 7, and we take on his history and lineage there. And because we don't have the mental capacity or the emotional body built at that point, it literally ends up in our cells. And so it forms the body that we have. It forms the constriction. It forms what our body ends up looking like, how we end up looking as a human being, and what we end up feeling physically. And then from 7 to 14 is when our emotional body develops. And so at that point, we are either modeled that we should feel our feelings and they are embraced, and we are helped to become healthy individuals that have emotional intelligence, or most of us are shut down in some kind of way. Either emotions were judged in our families, or we were told not to do certain things. In my case, I was told not to cry, that we were not allowed to cry, and so I never did. And whatever we take on, that's the part that we shut down. And then 14 to 21 is where we develop our intellectual body. And so with the intellectual body, it's we look at the world and we make up what we see as the world, how we think the world operates, and how we are to navigate that world based on what we have seen and felt viscerally as well as emotionally, either shut down or as awakened emotional intelligence. And so as these things happen, we become shaped as these human beings. I don't look at the ego as bad. I actually tell people, don't look at anything as good or bad. Not any experience, not any emotion, not any thought, because all of this really is just experience. And ultimately, what the 11s showed to me when they finally came in my late 30s were that we are here to be masters. And we are here to remember our mastery. And that mastery is physical mastery, which means our bodies, our environments. It is emotional mastery, which means our emotions and the energy that flows through us. And that is our mental mastery, which means learning how to focus, learning how to hold a mind with neutrality. And our spiritual mastery, which means really centering into the true power that we are as a God cell in the greater body of the divine presence that created all things. And so all of a sudden, my journey became about mastery. And so it didn't matter what happened outside. My job was, how do I master this? And so when we look at a lot of the experiences that take place, whether it was what happened around 2020, whether it is a personal experience that we have, whether it is something legal or something health that is a challenge, whether it is in our family or whether it is national or global, we are each given an opportunity to master these different levels. And we can either be swept away by it and allow our growth to be through the darkness of that, which is equally good as not being swept away by it and allowing ourselves to master ourselves by maintaining the highest octave of vibration that we can. I don't believe that there is a wrong path. I think that anything that happens can take us to the very same end result. One will just take us a little bit longer than the other one. And ultimately, that divine plan operates. And so, what we really have to look at is, how am I judging what's taking place? What am I really feeling? What is angering me about this? What is making me sad about this? And taking what we're projecting outside and bringing that back within to do the work that we're here to do. Because I believe that when we do the inner work, that is the true service to the world. When we tap into our humanity, only then can we serve the greater humanity.
Nice. Beautiful. I like that. Um, on the subject of mastery, I'd like to get into that. I'm curious about your, say, original, if any, spiritual indoctrination in that, say, 0 to 7 years. Was there, a cosmology that was presented to you about the nature of the universe, the nature of God, the nature of human life, all of that kind of thing? What were the seeds that you started with?
It's really interesting because I was reared in the United States. I grew up in a Sikh family, and we had a prayer room in our home. But I was never taught the Sikh language.
Hmm.
And when we went to temple, everything was spoken in the Sikh language.
Right.
And so there was this sense of faith. There was this sense of the love and the openness and the welcoming of the Sikh religion, which is such a beautiful religion to be a part of. But I didn't understand a word of it. But somehow it's almost as if I absorbed it anyway. And it served me very well to be that way and not understanding anything, because it allowed me to be open to all things and not really hook into anything, but instead feel into myself what feels like truth, what feels like it's meant to stay here, and what feels like it's just meant to be out there and left alone. And so even as I began my own spiritual growth journey, I never really hooked on any teachers or any processes or gurus or anyone to follow, because I had this idea in myself that anybody can reach enlightenment. It can't be reserved for just a few people. It can be achieved by certain scientific processes and all these things that you can do. But what about the innocent child, Aboriginal child that's sitting out there? What about the mother that is just simply doing her work every day? What about the man that is trying to just feed his family and being a good person? Like, why are these people demoted and not allowed to touch certain places? And so that led me to this place of feeling like we have to have been given the very life that would lead us to enlightenment if we'll just stay with it. But the problem is we've become a very heady world. So we stay trapped in this part of ourselves and we don't come down into the body. And the second part of it is we're not really taught to embrace our life as it is. So our lives become these things that we're trying to escape, or things that we're running to distract ourselves with to get out of them. And I hit a moment in my life where there was such a degree of trauma and grief that I knew that there had to be something in that darkness, that with all the years of spiritual growth I had done, that I had missed something, and that maybe all of the prior books I'd written and 1111 magazine that I'd created were beautiful works of light, but perhaps they were artificial lighting. Perhaps as a light worker, I had bamboozled myself into thinking light rather than really finding the true essence of light. And it was at that time that I decided, if darkness has come to my life, I'm not going to push it away. I'm going to let myself be swallowed whole by it. I'm going to choose to consciously be unconscious, to watch myself, to watch what happens, to still myself so much that I can watch the world, and to start to understand what true light really is and how that illuminates the darkness. And what I discovered was, by going into that place of presence and allowing myself to simply be in the life I was given, I was shown more through those steps than could be found in any of the books. And once I completed that whole experience, I started to receive all these sacred texts. And every time I would open a text, it would have something that I had come to on my own. And that's how I know that every single one of us has the capacity to become enlightened. We simply need to go through the gateway of the very life we have been given. And the task is for you to stay in that and not run away.
Nice. I love that. I wrote this, and I believe I wasn't the first person to say it in my book, but that your obstacles are not in your way; they are the way.
Yes.
And it's easy to say, because until you bump into that obstacle and it really looks to be wrong and bad and not supposed to be there, and I just want to do this, but this is in the way, then it's hard to remember, but it's absolutely true 100% of the time. I know that very, 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 very well.
In my latest trilogy that I wrote after that 7-year experience completed of stillness, the first book is Living, which is the 7 blessings of human experience. And I talk about these alternative blessings that we are given in our life as the very doorways to help us grow and expand and reach these places of high awareness. And the blessing of obstacles is one of those. And, challenges, conflict, all of these things, don't just look at them as, oh, there must be a silver lining. No, that is the golden doorway. It will actually take you where you want to go. And when you are ready to truly discover your multidimensional self, it's important that we don't fall into that place of trying to ascend. Like, we chose to be human. Why would we want to now ascend? Perhaps the issue is not our ascension, but actually our descension. We left our bodies. It's time to bring ourselves back into them, back into our lives, to really ground here. And so I think a lot of the things that have taken place, and particularly what occurred over 2020 and 2021, to me was very powerfully, however it arose, because it allowed people to stop. It allowed people to have to be with what they were feeling. It allowed people an opportunity to face themselves, to face their fears, to face things that our too distracted world doesn't want to stop long enough to face. And so when we can look at everything that comes our way, every single challenge and obstacle in that way, then all of a sudden we stop fighting life and we begin to flow with even that. And that's ultimately what we're here to do, is to flow with life, not fight life.
Nice. That's very cool. Yeah. Coming back to mastery, in one of my earlier days in my own journey of meditation and spending time in India and all of that kind of thing, which fell apart really well in the context of that it wasn't something that would have been an advantage to hold on to for the long run. It was a kind of stop. I love what you're saying about being raised in a church where you didn't understand what was going on, and what a blessing that can actually be for that openness, where you, like you said, you didn't hitch on to any dogma or doctrine in that respect. And then, so just seeing life as a wheel, and there are so many, I don't like to use the word dimensions, but elements to our inner life. And I had a stage 4 lymphoma in my early 30s. I was diagnosed with a cancer, spent 3 years fighting for my life, if you don't know that part of my story. And the inner complexity was staggering, of being, kind of like 2020 gave people the opportunity, whether they took it or not, to really self-reflect and get quiet and stop running amok in the same way that they had been. The Having to lay down for 3 years and just meet my soul at so many different levels, and seeing that there was a lot of places to, if you want to use the word, awaken from, and that all of those positions were needing to come to light, to come to awareness, from being unconscious to actually being conscious. And then it was more back to the India studies, just having the awareness that maybe it was I think actually somebody told me, I'm just piecing it together as I retell it, but that wherever you jump on, if it's a wheel of all of the pieces, just as an image, not to say that's an accurate symbol necessarily, but wherever you jump on is good. It gives you that place to begin the work, rather than getting overwhelmed by the complex nature of our own inner lives. And and then and there comes the mastery, right? When you master in a certain sliver of that wheel, and then become aware of, like, oh my gosh, there's so much more I don't know, which is always the nature of learning, right? It's just, I had this awareness last night of how we're just really scratching the surface. And I've been at this for a long time. This is like going on 35 years studying this subject in a strongly devoted way. But it's like, yeah, is it just popping the lid off in some respects, given the nature, like the scale of what we're dealing with?
I think that one of the greatest gifts I was ever given was that moment where my life stopped. And that 7-year period, I told the universe, I'm not doing anything. I'm not getting back up until my body tells me to get back up, because I know there's something valuable here. And if anyone can give themselves that gift, there's so much awareness that comes. But that's also where you'll find your biggest fears. Well, what if I stop? How will I take care of myself? Where will the money come from? What will people think? People will think I've failed. What will happen to me? I'll disappear. I'll become invisible. That's when you hear all of the shadow voices that are going to come up. And it showed me this multidimensional version of myself. It showed me all the illusions I had bought into. And in truth, from the moment we are born, we are gaslighted. Our parents were gaslighted. Every generation before us was gaslighted. And we just keep passing on the same gaslighting. So unless you stop long enough to understand that, you can't come to the subtle realizations that are there for you. You can't tap into the multidimensional nature. The second book of my trilogy, so the first book is the identity. It's the persona. It's the person that we express as in the world, and the one that's going to bump up against all of these life blessings, because we've created this false self virtually out of a childhood wound. And so we're going to meet that wound again and again and again, because they're echoes. The second book, being The 7 Illusions That Derail Personal Power, Purpose, and Peace, is the shadow. It's the animal nature. It's the monster inside. And when I say these things, these are not parts of us that we're here to push away, or that we're here to dislike or get rid of. This is the part of us that loved us enough to give us experience, but is also calling us into our highest expression. It is the part that will show us the way. And so once we start to understand the very illusions that have taken our power and our peace, such as things like this gaslighting into time, or the ideas that we have about money or hierarchy or even evolution, and we step into the true keys that are within us, that are our essence, then we start to open the door to humanity. And that's the part that I don't think people realize, is we think of humanity as this thing outside of us, this greater collective that we are here to serve, or we keep searching for humanity. But as long as we avoid ourselves and we don't even feel what we need to feel for ourselves, then we actually don't have any humanity. Unless we're willing to feel our heartbreak and our hope and our high, we haven't touched our humanity. And so the third book is knowing the 7 human expressions of grace, because we have to give ourselves the grace of this humanity for us to even walk up to the doorway of knowing our pure essence. And complexity, the sevens work across each other. So the blessing of life correlates to the illusion of time, which correlates to complexity, in which we have to give ourselves the grace of simplicity. And so I was able to see this really intricate grid of what truly creates the human architecture and allows this journey to unfold, but in a way that is so beautiful, that creates such a tapestry and a story that we can fall in love with. And ultimately, isn't that what we're here to do? To fall in love with ourselves, to step in a place of such residency that we fully own this body and who we are and the fullness that that can express as. And only then are we stepping into that position of becoming a change agent, because we've become a change agent within ourselves. And that is how we then empower ourselves to create change externally.
Beautiful. I love that. I don't know if I caught it correctly, but in response to the complex nature of the soul and the spiritual realm, for example, or life itself, even humanity, and the grace of simplicity. That's beautiful. I love that. And it both are true, right? One doesn't cancel the other. But what I notice is that, if you can relate to the word God, I know the meaning of that word is actually problematic. I don't like universe so much because it's more about the creator, but who cares, right? It's I try to let myself out of word jail. But that, it can seem, say, in the life of a human being that maybe is caught in a lot of challenges and obstacles and always troubleshooting the next problem that comes along. And this is what I try to offer when you study the nature of the chaos in the world. You actually start to discover the order that is inherently installed there, and you can't actually get rid of it. It doesn't matter how messy it gets on the surface. It never really overrides whatever, how people could call that natural law. The emotions are extremely ordered. They feel chaotic. It feels like a totally wild scene, but it's in reality not. And then at the level of programming, that gets even way more simple. There are a discrete number of ways that we have, I like how you've said it before, just organized our own energy in our bodies, maybe around water, or every element contributing to that, and giving those messages. And they are a kicker, they're a showstopper. And the vast majority of people are not willing to feel at that level that threatens their life, that threatens love, that threatens control, that threatens their wholeness, their oneness. And but it is a beautiful thing, because everything comes down. We don't have a lot of problems where we have a discrete number of messages that are coming from the unconscious, and so it just simplifies it to no end without even disturbing the complexity at the same time. Sorry, going in circles here.
We do live in a world of paradox. And so, this is the land of opposites. You're going to have the opposites. And ultimately, with the signs and the symbols, what I realized was they appear outside of us, but they appear outside of us to take us back inside, just as does every single experience that happens externally. When we have an explosion out in the world, it is occurring out in the world, but is it allowing you to take yourself back inside, or are you staying distracted by what's out in the world? And that's where we have to really look at ourselves, because every time we allow ourselves to be distracted by something, that is escapism. It is another way we've allowed our mind, our emotions, our energy, our presence to leave our body. And if we're not here, then where are we? If we're not here, then we don't even exist. There is no person. There is just an empty vessel here that is living by default out in the world. And so the mastery is really getting to the place of understanding that the world can be used as this barometer, as this personal growth path to show me more of me, that everything outside of me is a reflection and a mirror of me. And if I'm willing to say, where is that in me, and really go inside to find it, then all of a sudden I'll discover the part of my consciousness or my cellular structure that is holding that very energy and contributing to the creation outside. And so, in that way, we are integrated with the world. We are a part of the world. But by stepping into mastery and getting ourselves to a place that we really harness our mind in a way that we keep it at the highest place, that we neutralize our emotions, that we have a pulse on our energy, then all of a sudden we step into a level of mastery that is in the world, but not of the world. And that's a far greater use of our power and our presence than anything we can even do with our hands and our voices. And once we realize that, then we will have stepped into the true power that we are. It's not that we can't go out in the world and do something, but we understand why we're doing it. And that to me is the distinction between the spiritual rebel and people that are just out there trying to do something for an agenda that is either conscious or deeply unconscious. And those are things we must become aware of if we really do want to serve the world.
Right. And by agenda, to me, that means motive, right? What is driving you? Like you said, either it's going to be one of two things, either conscious love or unconscious fear. Again, at the level of that simplicity. And yeah, we're not so used to being driven by anything but the fear, because you can talk to a lot of people, maybe more normal people out in the world, and they'll tell you that their fear is very important, and that fear protects you, and fear is the thing that's going to save you from death. And I started to really think about that and went like, well, if fear protects you from death, then 100% of the people fail, because all the bodies pass, right? It didn't.
And this is also one of the cycles, within the book of living. The seventh blessing is the blessing of death. We will go through death over and over and over again. It is the seventh stage. And at the end of death is rebirth. And that rebirth is not into something more of an identity. Spiritually, it's designed to be less of identity so that you can be more of the greater presence that you are. And so all of these things that we have made up in our minds that we are to fear, if we give ourselves a moment to really sink into what benefit they bring us, then we can start to look at them in a different way. And Miguel also mentioned about transmuting our emotions, not to neutralize them. To me, they're kind of linked, because when you feel your emotions and you move into them and you allow yourself to fully feel them, you're going to start that transmutation process. But as long as you can't be neutral about them, those emotions stay active. Once you can become neutral about them and allow those emotions to express in a different creative manner, that transmutation is going to happen. I want to just really emphasize to people, we can't think our way into these things. That's where we've bamboozled ourselves by our own minds. There's so much that takes place naturally. Things like forgiveness, things like love. These are natural occurrences. You cannot force it. They have to flower. And that's the true meaning of us being nature. We will flower just like nature, but we have to give the presence, the nurturing, and the openness for that to happen.
And at the end of the day, the words won't really do it. We can still have enough in common and use our words. I might be the same with the word neutralize, but I get where you're coming from with it, because say an emotion comes up that you really don't like, and for the most part, we don't like any of them. Not a single one of them, except when you get into the so-called higher emotions that, yes, they're higher frequency, but they don't make you higher. It's not that you're in a higher place than the person who's in a low emotion. That I feel really strongly about. And if when the emotion comes up, say the high one that you like and you're attached to, or the low one that you don't like and you're trying to get away from it, that's what's not, I think, neutral in what you're saying. And part of the system method that I'm teaching is actually to welcome the unwelcomable, to love the unlovable, and what you're doing there is, I can go both ways. Is it a transmutation just simply by your awareness, by paying attention to an experience, giving it all of your attention without trying to push or pull it in any way? It does start to shift.
Yes.
Yes.
That's so much of the reason why I kept being nudged to create this trilogy, which is like a set of oracles. What I came to realize during my 7-year period, and with the understanding that very few people are going to stop their lives for 7 years and do what I did, that I needed to create a way that people could better understand how they are expressing, so that there was more of an embrace of it. The truth is, our identity, our shadow animal monster nature, and our humanity higher self is always active. All three of these parts are always present and active, but we are only present to one of them. That's where the shift has to happen. We're trying to be an identity, or we're trying to be the higher self. And if we're trying to be the higher self, I can't be the shadow. I'm going to not do these certain behaviors of the identity because I'm over here being the higher self. Or if we're in a conflict, all of a sudden we become the shadow. We completely forget about our identity. We completely forget about our humanity and our higher self. Or if we're in an identity and we're trying to build a business, all of a sudden we're not thinking about our higher self or our shadow. We're over here focused on building a business. What I want individuals to understand is, can you bring your presence to understand all three of these are operating? And if you're not present to them, then they're going to operate in that very place that you are present to without you knowing. And so by checking in with yourself, you get to know what these different aspects of you are feeling, are thinking, are acting upon. And you start to merge these three chords into one unified space so that you're fully there. Does it mean that anger won't be there? It will be there, because the shadow might feel anger at something that you're doing. But if you're present to it, all of a sudden you're going to pause and go, wait a minute, I'm feeling some anger around here. Why am I moving forward on something I feel angry about that I wasn't aware of? So it helps you to hone into a higher expression of yourself, because you're now attuned to the different aspects of yourself. And it's just an important part in that human growth journey, which allows for more presence. Again, the trilogy or the work that I do, it's all about people slowing down, becoming more present, really being attuned to what's happening in their space. Because if you know that, then you can have greater sensitivity to what's happening outside of it.
Right. And it's an interesting wave between that, like the silence, the stillness, that almost, at least in my experience, it always erupts into some kind of creation, manifesting something. Writing 3 books, it's not a little thing. Having a magazine and a radio show, those are all, I know what it takes to be in the back end and handle the 9 billion little details that go into that. And so it's a beautiful, sometimes in India, it was all, you just need to sit in meditation. That's your service to the world. Just sit there and keep sitting there. And then they would do nothing. Someone else that I studied, he wasn't alive when when I studied his work, but he would talk about demonstrating your freedom. He didn't talk as much about like enlightenment or awakening in that context, but for him it was freedom, which can't be defined by except the person who's, you know, on that journey or being that journey. But the what was the point? I don't know if you want to say anything. No.
You know, I live a really interesting life because it appears that I do a lot of things. To the observer, it would look like I must be working 24/7 to be able to create all that I did, or to write 3 books simultaneously. You know, I must have had to sit down and just write and put all of that. And I probably don't work more than 4 hours a day, and on some days I don't do even that. So I'm in this place of blending what you talked about, the guru saying of you need to sit in stillness, you need to have space, and having the action. And that's a really important piece to take note of, because what my life has turned into is a healthier balance of masculine and feminine. And most people don't understand that they're operating out of an unhealthy balance of masculine and feminine. Our masculine and feminine energies are always balanced. They're either unhealthy or they're healthy. If they're unhealthy, then your masculine energy is forcing and pushing and acting and trying to get somewhere and building and just going off in the directions it needs to go. And the feminine side of you, the receptive side of you, is being dominated. And because it's being dominated, it's now having to manipulate the way it works. It's having to, pull from here to get over here. So that's an unhealthy masculine and feminine energy. But when you get into a healthier framework of masculine and feminine energy, then all of a sudden you understand the necessity of the feminine. You understand the need for something to gestate, the necessity of space and time, of contemplation, of nurturing, of allowing something to really form and be creative about it and inspired by it and love on it, and all of these things that feminine energy does. And to stand in that power of knowing that it will be in the time it is meant to be, that trust and that faith. And at a certain point, the masculine side of you is going to become inspired. And that inspired action is the moment to act, not before. So it's not just about getting stuff done, because that will amount to nothing but exhaustion. It might create a lot of money for you, it might not, but it will end up in exhaustion, and it will end up in self-betrayal and self-abuse. But if you allow the feminine to dictate when the masculine energy acts, then all of a sudden you step into a flow. You don't get exhausted. You aren't depleted. You're operating in a flow. And what that means is you're also becoming more organic. So you don't follow the constructs of time the way the rest of the world follows them. You might not write 3 books in the same way another person would. You might not create in the same way. You might do a lot of different things where somebody else does one thing. There are all these different parts of living organically that are going to be uniquely you. Creativity and creation is chaos. If you look at the Big Bang, that was chaos that formed universes. And so we have to be willing to allow that unraveling and that chaotic creativity to birth within us, to define our more natural selves. Otherwise, we're just kind of following a template that everyone else is following. And then we wonder why we're still empty and why we're still unfulfilled, or how come this isn't working? This strategy's not working. Because we're not meant to be strategy. We are meant to be uniquely divine rebels of spiritual creativity that are here to live and be art. We are each experiences of art. And when we make our lives that way, when we express that way, when we allow our passion to exude in that way, then all of a sudden we have lives that are more meaningful and fulfilling, rather than just trying to get something or take. And that's actually the duality of the world. So often, what looks like giving is actually taking. What looks like serving is actually manipulating. And the more you sit back and allow yourselves to contemplate, you'll start to discern the distinction between the two. And then you'll start to work differently to see what is it that I really want to be on this planet? What vibration, what emanation am I willing to now express so that I can fully own who I am in a powerful way?
Very nice. Yeah, there's often discussions in my world around the masculine and the feminine as archetypes, and it's I'm currently in a quandary right now, not a or more of an inquiry, not a quandary, I guess, around how. So what I noticed, what spurred it, is just seeing how it doesn't matter. My whole life, that there has been always more. There's some kind of 80-20 thing going on here again. There's just typically been more women in the healing world. Whether that's spirituality or physical healing or learning and personal development in general. And it's been harder for men, and I worked for women exclusively for 15 years with my own hidden agendas that came to light to me after the passing of my father. A great deal of awareness to my own inner masculine was birthed at that time, and I was able to, without even trying to see men in a completely different way and stop placing the presence of evil in life on their shoulders or blaming them for that. Just, a whole bunch of lucidity. This podcast was born of that exact awakening. And but regardless, I see how the men that have come into my world, done courses, worked with me, it's harder for them. I like very much how you're talking about, like, the balance never goes away. You can't break that balance, but it can, show you a circumstance that you don't like, and that's how balance looks in this time. So I'm curious what it's been like for, like, you work individually with people as well and do groups and courses and stuff like that. What's been your experience of working with men, and how might it be different, and why?
I work with probably equally men and women. It's
Mhm.
always been interesting to me, how that balance has been there in terms of what I've attracted. I don't do groups and I don't do large gatherings because I find an intimacy and a presence and a much more powerful service can be given when I work one on one with a person. Very few people know what it feels like to be held, to be unconditionally loved, to truly be seen and heard, and to be given an understanding of some of the mystical and magical nuances that this life offers. And so, by being that way with individuals, I think that's vastly supportive to both men and women, and that's the feedback that I get. I think that we have more women in the healing and spiritual growth uh, pathways because there's a lot of healing that needs to happen with women. We've seen the feminism movement. We've seen now the divine feminine movement. We've seen a lot of women, rise up to say it's all about the feminine. It's all about the divine feminine. And the truth is, you can't have the feminine without the masculine. And as stated, there's either an unhealthy balance or there's a healthy balance. And I don't think women realize that when they are so adamant about the feminine and the feminine must rise and all of this, we have to take back our power. You've actually become the masculine, the unhealthy masculine, because you're now dominant over the masculine. And that's now suppressing the masculine into being the unhealthy feminine. So we have to really look at how we're utilizing our energy in regard to that. I've met more men that actually have a greater feminine balance in their energy of receptivity and that actually are quite powerful in their healthy masculine than I have met women that are healthy and balanced. And we have to own that, because this swing to the other way is not going to heal our world, much less heal ourselves. We have to understand as women what our part is. We have to understand how we've overcompensated and become hard. And I'm speaking this from experience. I was a type A workaholic for many years, very heavy masculine energy, driven, going out there to get what I wanted to create. I understand that dominant masculine energy because I did it in my fashion career. And to be able to see that transition into allowing the feminine to come into my life, it is a softening that takes place, not a hardening. The fierceness that you're looking for doesn't necessarily mean that fight that has to be there. The fierceness we're looking for is an inner strength that's so grounded in the presence of who we are that we hold that balance as sacred. And we approach every person from seeing that sacred balance within them, whether they exhibit it or not. That is true feminine power. That is the true nurturing that we can bring to the planet. And when we start to deal in that type of loving kindness with ourselves, then we can bring that loving kindness to our work, to our clients, to our children, to our service. But until we can soften and give that love to ourselves in that way, we're going to continue acting in that unhealthy way. And the same goes for anyone who has done a lot of spiritual work or personal growth work. Be really, really sensitive to whether you have made up in your mind that you are elevated above other people, because the very thought of that shows how much work there is still left to do. That is a very shadow perspective to take. Only when you can get to the place of true equality and see the other from that place of equality and a compassion, not necessarily for what they're going through, but for the fact that they can't see who they truly are. That's the place where you will start to get into equality. And so this is a time more than ever where it's not so much about us discerning what's on the outside. It's about discerning who are we being on the inside? How are we thinking? How are we seeing others? How are we expressing our energy? What are we putting out there? So this is about cleaning up who we are in order to allow that consciousness to clean up our world.
Very nice. I love that. Back to the masculine on, say, on the subject of feeling emotions and feeling the body, and the degree to which, at least in my observation, at least in my experience of, being in a variety of different spiritual circles, and then also my own work of it, it just seems to me, and maybe it's not your experience, but that it is more difficult to feel. And this is no judgment whatsoever. This is deep curiosity. This is the desire to be of service as well. If there's a calling, there's something here, and I don't know exactly how it's going to take shape, but so does that sound left field for you, that there's a lesser degree of, and this is generalizations, right? Obviously, it's not going to be the case for every single person. And for those that come to you or myself or anyone for help, they got themselves to that place, likely with a great deal of inner work. And that's what I notice, is that for the most part, people show up after they've not tried everything and failed. They've tried everything and been successful, but they want to go deeper, and they want to explore what they don't know about themselves, what they don't see and feel about themselves. And so it just does seem harder. It seems harder for them. And is this a product of nature, for example, that if a man is to be if you go back to our roots, if that's even true, that we're like, bringing forward from those days when they had to like go and fight in the forest and fend for their lives and protect the women and children and be much more in a physical war, right? Our wars are all psychological now. It's all propaganda and perception. And it's actually really difficult for men in that respect, because I think it brings up their, they want to like carry a rifle and just shoot the bad guys. But that's not the kind of war that we're in. It's not exactly like that. And so, what is that? Is it something more natural? It seems like a gatekeeper of some kind for them to overcome some really huge injuries. Are men more injured in our life? Is that part of how, societies that are getting taken down, which I feel ours is systematically, or at least there's a lot of effort to do that. The first thing they take down is the men, right? The whole pornography industry that siphoned off so much of the life energy that would otherwise be coupling with the feminine and making, birthing new life. And
This is a really complex question, because there is a degree of it that has to do with how we're nurtured. And I know we're focused on men, but I would say it's on both parts. Men throughout the ages have had to go to war, have had to do all these things, which would very easily, harden an individual. And as a mother of two boys, I can tell you that boys are the most deeply loving and sensitive creatures. They are loyal. They are open-hearted. They are deeply tender. And that really surprised me when I had my sons. I didn't know boys were that way. And I was reared as a girl who was told from a very young age, you're not allowed to cry or God will make you cry. And so I never cried. The first time I cried, I was 40 years old. And so it doesn't have to do with just men. It can happen with women as well. And what my life has taught me is that life is intelligent, and it will keep giving you the experiences to break down that shell, however many you need, until you do. And that's what happened to me. I hit that moment where something so tragic had to happen that the tears, once they started, they just wouldn't stop for a very long time. And I think that's the fear that a lot of people have when it comes to feeling, that if I let myself feel this, it can kill me.
yeah.
If I let myself feel this, the tears might never stop and I'll drown. And I would say drown within them and let them soften you. You will rise back up. But more importantly, when it comes to that question of men, because I think as women, we so want to say, why are men so wounded? And we don't realize we're the ones that gave birth to them. We're the ones that rear them. So what part are we as women playing in that wounding?
Absolutely. And it's never
Question I asked on the Rebel Road. That was the specific question that I wanted an answer to, because I had that question. Why are men so wounded? What makes them that way? In trying to reconcile an experience I had had with a masculine. And I was very clearly shown, answers of how this unfolds and the part that we women also play in that. And we have to, again, own that and be part of the solution in that conversation, in that helping to open up. All of these things like misogyny and pornography and all these things that happen, they happen because people are hurting. That is the wounded masculine trying to find feeling. And so there is an intimacy that has to come, but it is a seeing, hearing kind of intimacy before it's ever a touch relational type of intimacy.
Yeah, that was a big awareness when I was living in Nepal with families in a traditional kind of a setting, and watching the dynamics between men and women. It was wow, so fascinating. The women were all resentful. They were angry. They had way too much work to do. The men on the outside appeared to be actually children. Many of them didn't have an intellect beyond 10 years old. I'm not judging. This is just what was going on. And then I really started to look at that, because it was easy, even in my more indoctrinated younger years, would be easy to say, oh, the men are useless. The men are lazy. The men are not skilled or immature, and just put it on them. And then, but that's exactly the question. Well, who raised these men, right? Who is bringing up these children to be in those roles and create this gross, or a version of balance that is like dysfunctional, not really life-giving, not harmonious in a way that it could be. All that potential is always there. So it's just a fascinating kind of a thing, that it feels like there's some, is it even just a readiness? Is it a time of life? Is it, most people will wait for the big crash and wait for things to fall apart, and then that will move them to seek some kind of healing. The family falls apart, the whatever kind of bored in their face that they receive, and that's fairly typical. It's much more atypical that people will do the inner work without some pain to drive them. I don't think that's necessarily needed, though, and we can preempt that and go and discover what inside of ourselves is the seeds of some kind of chaos or destruction, or it doesn't mean that bad things don't happen either, right? That's another part of it. So yeah, I'm just doing
To
it.
the role that we must play right now as a species, if we really look at the time that we are alive in the span of history and ask ourselves, what is my role at this time? What am I the bridge between? Because we have this history and legacies and ancestry and generations that have come before us. And then we have the generations that are to follow. So what is the bridge that we must be to have a different future than we have had of the past? And one of the primary things that I have contemplated is we live in a culture globally of criticism, condemnation, and judgment.
Yeah.
And if we continue to live in that sort of culture, then our young boys and our young girls are being reared with criticism, condemnation, and judgment, rather than respect and honor and upliftment. And when we celebrate a child, when we have gratitude for a child, when we honor a child for who they are, when we vision the best that that child can become, that consciousness contributes to what that child becomes. And so a lot of the young men and young women that are coming into the world, they are being victimized by the ways we see them as parents, or we criticize or condemn them or judge them, or the way society does if they're a little bit different. And if we can shift that tiny kernel into one where we celebrate and honor, then all of a sudden we will see a different kind of human. We will see a type of healthy balance in the masculine and feminine. Because when you're in that place, you create receptivity. That creates a healthy feminine in both sexes. It creates the inspired action in both sexes so that you have the healthy masculine. And so we have to shift how we're being with one another and with our children. But to do that, it all goes back to the self. How do we criticize, condemn, and judge ourselves? Because we can only give to others the way we treat ourselves. And most people, under their breath or silently or in that quick glance of the mirror, will stick a knife in their own back based on their looks, based on what they think they failed at, based on what they didn't achieve, based on what their life or their bank account looks like. We must find greater kindness and compassion for ourselves. And only then can we really not project that onto the children that we have or the people around us that we say we love. That's not loving to ourselves, and it's not loving to the world.
Hmm. Hmm. Yeah, the whole system of reward punishment is wow. It's just it's if there's an evil, that might be it. There's another question I wanted to ask you. And I just recall in raising my son, it's so humbling, right, to raise a child. And it's all of the things that you think you know or people try to tell you, it goes out the window because you're there with the living, breathing experiment. And I could see so early on any kind of reward punishment that I had been indoctrinated with, and I would resort to, like it would be a desperate measure of some kind because I needed things to shift and they weren't, and it made things worse. I saw that so quickly that it demoralized, it disempowered, it made me feel terrible. It made my son feel terrible. And then I really backed off. We were actually discussing rites of passage the other day. Maybe that's another good subject. And my son hasn't been through any rituals. He hasn't had any public recognition for his transition right now from boy to man. But he's making all the transitions. He's doing it, and it's as a result of me not engineering anything. The less I engineer, the less I push him, the less I. Again, it didn't work. I got a rebel son too, right? When I try to suggest something, he's for sure not going to do that. And but here, organically and naturally, the growth is happening, and he's becoming a fine young man with very quirky interests and skills. And so it's really fun to watch. There is something so natural about that you don't need to reward and punish every little thing that a human being is doing. That's the nature of the world that we're stuck in, unless you remove yourself to a degree. Yeah, honor them for who they are. Exactly. um, I love what you said. What is my role at this time? There can't be a better question. And that's to me a daily question. Like, what is my role? And it's open arms, open, like without any agenda, just like, okay, what's my role? Same thing happened in 2020 when the world appeared to be ending. And that was my prayer to God. Like, just when, how would you have use me now? What's meant to come through me, and all kinds of things did in the process. I love that. What am I the bridge for? And that's actually something that a fellow said. I'm having a number of conversations with men right now just to try to get deeper into this subject. And he felt like the archetypes were a good bridge because it depersonalizes and it takes that, maybe what can be blame away. He was saying he was getting triggered by women who are like, where are all the men? We got a war here and the men aren't showing up and as much as they should be. And that kind of message is just gonna like shut them down and make them turn away. But yeah, so if we transition to this subject of you haven't even said the word. I said the word, but a lot of people feel like we are in this stage of humanity in a war between good and evil. And one of my colleagues, Mark Archer, that I've interviewed a few times, he reframes that, and I think it's actually really, really great. And I'm curious about your opinion, that the war really is not between good and evil. It's between life and death. And you said it already, that death is so important. My subject is the hero's journey, but we're really on the same page, even though you haven't used those words. And you have to die all the time, right? Like death is something it's almost part of the daily life that you go through. And so how do you see all of that? I know it's pretty esoteric and hard to come to any hard conclusions around, but I'm curious nonetheless.
Yes, one of the 7 illusions in the book Being is the illusion of duality. There's also the illusion of war. And both of those speak to our thoughts around good and evil, or light and dark. And what I'd love for people to realize is it's really between self and self. That's all that is. Duality is an inner division. It is a way of seeing things and choosing one stance so that the other side has to be the opposite. It is creating the duality outside of us because we are conflicted within. That war that we see outside is the inner war that takes place between our masculine and our feminine, between our healthy and our unhealthy, between our light side and our dark side. And so there's this embrace that has to take place within us. There's a unity that has to be found inside. And that doesn't negate either side. It brings them together to understand the beauty of both, to understand that they each have their own role and that this is part of why we came. The painting that you chose to use as the back of your placard was the very first painting that I painted as I was going through that severe grief process. I was given the message to paint 40 paintings in 40 days. And that was the very first painting that came through. And if you look at that painting, what it basically is the cross section of an eye. And what is being seen on one side of the eye is what's being held in the back of the eye, in the consciousness, and it's depicted outside. But what's in the center of that are three beings. There is the golden self, the higher self that sees all things from the big picture. And there are the two selves that were birthed to experience this world, and one is light and one is dark. And that makes up the trinity of who we are. And so when we start to realize that these three parts actually comprise the sacred holy self, then all of a sudden we are faced with our own judgment of how we are killing off one side of ourselves, so at war, or how we are judging one side, or in duality, good and evil. And we start to clean up that garden within that has to be kind of trimmed and beautified and all of that. And so you'll see those three as you have on the screen right now, and how they are the central component to everything we see out in the world. And we will either create heaven on earth or we will create hell on earth. And it all depends on how we're willing to see ourselves. Because if we can see ourselves as sacred souls, as love, as purity, as perfection, we will create heaven. We will create a perfect world. But if we are going to condemn any part of ourselves, then we will watch that condemnation play out in front of us. I want to go back to talking about our children. A lot of people think that our children have come in for us to steer and guide and rear and keep safe and help get them to where they're here to be. These children came in to teach us. They're our teachers. But even more so, they're our echoes. And I tell people that they are the first and most powerful sign and symbol that you'll receive on your personal growth path. Because whatever your children come up against, if you will realize that's just a pointer, they are just pointing you back to the very age and stage and experience that you had that wounded you. That is the only reason they're having to go through it.
Yeah.
It's to help you go back to something. My son at 3 years old had a huge asthma attack, and he ended up in the hospital, and it happened to be on Mother's Day. And that was very profound to me at the time. I was just starting to realize and intuit what the symbols mean. So it meant a lot to me that, okay, number one, he can't breathe, and the lungs and asthma has to do with suppressed tears and grief. And I knew I couldn't cry. So I'm like, okay, well, this is, he's holding all my tears. And then the fact that it was on Mother's Day, it was like, this has something to do with me. It has something to do with my mother. It has something to do with the mothers that came before her. But I wasn't advanced enough at that time to fully realize it. And then a year later, he ended up in the hospital on Mother's Day with the same kind of asthma attack. And I was going through a really difficult period in my arranged marriage at that time, knowing that I needed to leave, but too afraid to, not able to feel because it was all suppressed so deeply. And so there were these moments that I started to notice every time something happens to my son, it is happening to him, but he's trying to tell me something about me. And if I would focus the healing on myself, the issue would resolve in him.
I know.
If I tried to fix his issue, it would prolong into something else. So we have to be really careful about distraction. It's not that we're not here to support those around us. We are here to love. We are here to be compassionate. But we are also here to understand that our consciousness contributes to everything that is outside of us, and particularly impacting the ones closest to us.
Indeed. Yeah. No, I had one of the biggest breakthroughs I had with my son was when I finally stopped working on him, stopped working on his dad. And there was stuff to work on. There was problems. It's not to whitewash it over and say there's nothing wrong, like maybe with your son's lungs or any of that kind of stuff. But it was exactly the same. That when I did the U-turn back to myself, took it all in here. Yes, if there's problems out there, what can I find about myself that is resonating with that, cooperating with that, supporting, unconsciously supporting the problem, and systematically took it out. Next thing you know, with absolutely no provocation, my son comes back and leans into me and wants to be around me and trusts me and follows my direction again. And that had been completely broken at 11, by the way. It was his 11th year. Yeah, that happened. So,
And I
yeah.
want to say too, Beth, this isn't a make wrong. So anyone that's hearing this isn't about blaming yourself for not being right or good enough. It's not about, you being bad in any kind of way. You are the journey. All of this entire life experience was orchestrated and participated by these other souls specifically to give you an experience, to create this amazing opportunity for your remembering, and for you to take agency, for you to return to sacred residency, for you to empower yourself and understand your unique individuality and your genius, for you to choose you, to be able to be all that you desire to be without the encumbrances, the strings and the strands and the ties and the binds of all those who came before you. You're the one to break free. And when we talk about that bridge between the past and the future, what we are here to do is to be the clearinghouse for all of that ancestral stuff that has built up in the past. I know that you've experienced a great deal of grief, Beth, with the passing of your parents, and my experience with grief was deeply profound. Through that experience, I never let the tears stop as long as they wanted to come, because I started to realize at a certain point, the tears I'm shedding are not mine. These are now the tears of my mother and my grandmothers. These are now the tears after that period stopped. These are now the tears of the world. I'm feeling that grief of the world. So we can be the clearinghouse. We're all energy. Are we willing to take on that level of service and not judge it, but just simply allow it? Because we can.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. There's some kind of fine line because and I'm not saying you're doing this. I'm working it out for myself in the spiritual world, how they'll talk about it. And it's absolutely true. When I was healing from cancer, I became acutely aware of my ancestral inheritance and the damage that had been done and had never been healed because it was always in crisis and survival mode. I was the one who had the luxury to lay down for 3 years and do all of the self-reflection. And so very much feeling as I healed that I was healing also on their behalf. And then the future, right? Any amount of work that we can do right now, to me, is going to make it easier for those who come in our footsteps. And I'm already seeing some of those wheels turn where work that used to be way, way more difficult, right? For example, to talk about death and feel the programming around death, that wasn't possible, right? That there was a time when people wouldn't, if you said that word, they would run out of the room and just not be able to. But we're in a different place now, and the work that you're doing, the work I'm doing, the work that everybody's doing in their own way, it's hard.
It is hard work, and it will be the most fulfilling work you'll ever do, but it can be hard, and sometimes it can be deeply painful. And that's why it's really important to have someone that will walk beside you, like Beth, like myself, that really can hold you and help you understand the subtleties of what you're going to experience. A lot of people can talk about the things that you're going to go through from an intellectual standpoint. My recommendation is go out and find the mentor or the coach or the facilitator that has actually walked through those very places themselves. They're the only ones that are going to know what you're experiencing mentally, emotionally, physically, viscerally within your cells. They're going to understand the moments of boredom. They're going to understand the moments of heartbreak, the moments where you feel like doing something and your body's too exhausted to do it, the moments when you're so high and feel like you could take on the world, but then fear chokes its hands around your neck. You need to have someone that's been in every one of those places and is vulnerable enough to share with you their walk through it to help you move your walk along as well. Because that level of intimacy is what's missing in our world. It's why people aren't fully stepping into their power. They feel alone. They feel like no one's had the same issue that they've had. And it's important for us as mentors and teachers and speakers to start telling the truth about our own experiences and not just project images of perfection or my life's all together. Because the truth is, we're human and we will be growing and learning and moving through all kinds of stuff until the day we leave here. Because when we are finally fully enlightened, we will go poof and we won't be here anymore. And so as long as we're here, we are walking through things. But it's when you find someone that's willing to be so devoted to their walk that they dig into the dirt and they find the gold. They find the treasure that is always resting there.
Yeah, exactly. So you stay in a place of never being, the playing field to me is level, but with persona, with our identity, how we want to see ourselves, we will position, oh, I'm so much further ahead than that guy. And that's, I think I wrote a line about this last night, that freedom doesn't make you great. It makes you humble, right?
Yes.
It is the most grounding thing. And somebody, it was so beautiful yesterday that I've worked with, and she said how much credibility that gives me, not to congratulate myself, but that I will stay in the trenches and not go to that place. I mean, I think I signed off on an easy life probably right at the beginning or way before that or something like that. And just that you're always continuing, and that's the tradition of coaching that I teach also, that you're always there doing the work with them, never just watching them and observing them. It's no, you're right there with them, because it's one field. You can't not be there with them.
Yeah.
And right, and I do have the sense that with enough collective work, that it can get easier for maybe it's future generations. Maybe we don't have to wait that long to see it. I've already seen evidence of what used to be difficult it is getting more easy these days. So your point about intimacy is amazing. I actually was listening to a podcast. I might do a rant on this in my House of Free Will, and talking about the culture of coaching, and how it's the coaches coaching the coaches, and then they go for some coaching, and it's all this and really putting down life coaches, which I reject that title entirely. Even though I train coaches, I strongly encourage themselves to never call themselves a life coach, because it's not about giving advice. It's not about telling people what to do or telling them what you see about them, which a lot of people, they want that, but it doesn't really help them. Certainly doesn't help you to do that. But to be in that role, right? The hero's journey, mentorship is built in. It's hardwired. And
Yes.
right,
Yes.
a human being can't learn. Yeah.
In my book Being, each of the illusions talk about a transition that we are making. And for example, we are moving from business to philanthropreneurs, where there is a component of business along with philanthropy inside of there. And in one of the illusions, we're moving from teacher to example. teacher is still something that's hierarchical. And we have to get to a place where we see the equality in one another. Despite what our experiences are, we're going to have different experiences, which means we've been exposed to different things. But at a base level, we're all equal. We're all 99% essence. We're all 99% pure soul. It's the 1% that is the human story that makes us different. Only 1% makes us different, but it's that 1% that we are here to make the uniqueness of our particular experience. And so as we walk together in this mentorship, you are here to be examples. All of us are here to be examples. And when we get off that ladder of hierarchy, then all of a sudden, whatever it is that we are sharing and communing and in intimacy about, it sinks in more deeply because you're seeing people eye to eye rather than looking down on people as something that needs to rise up.
Exactly. Yeah. And you're potentially more of a mirror to them because of that. A stronger mirror, the light comes clear more back to them. And it's as if you're doing nothing in the process and it's everything for them to see themselves. So yeah, that's beautiful. I had a feeling we'd have a lot in common, Simran. And yeah, so I don't know if there's any other subjects. I did bring up rites of passage. Do you have any take on that? There's a whole camp of worlds that believes that is like a very big missing key in our world, and I'm not totally sure. Especially looking at particular rites of passage, say the Hero with a Thousand Faces, Joseph Campbell's work, and how gory that is. The torture of young men and boys, especially, over and over and over. I read it as a young adult. I had to put it down when I was preparing to write my book. It was like, yeah, I couldn't take it in anymore. So what's your take on that?
Yeah, again, in my second book of the trilogy, Being, I talk about human rights as a reflection of rites of passage. We are here to move through certain doorways that are our rites of passage. They might look like some of the indigenous rites of passage and ceremony and different things that places do, but I think it goes beyond that. I think it's more of an honoring of and a celebrating of where a person is. It's more of an intimacy of being with that person and bringing forth the wisdom of experience from a circle around them. So if there is a man that is moving from 12 to 13, to have, a group of wise ones around him that celebrate him and lift him up, but then share stories. To me, there's a different type of rites of passage that needs to start taking place where we are communing and communicating, where we are allowing the person to understand that they are rising up to be an individual, but that they have a community around them. And I think there's so many, especially young people right now, that feel so alone, that feel very outside the culture or not quite sure where to fit in, or feel like they have to be quiet, that they can't say what they really feel, that it's important for us to start creating these threads of connection again, to stop the busyness, to realize that there's more important things than what we're here to attain, or how much we can accumulate, or the thing that we have to go fight for. Because so often the thing that we are here to really advocate for is sitting inside our own homes or inside of our own communities. And so again, we have to look at ourselves. I think that in itself is its own rite of passage. Where did I leave my village to go off into some other world? And can I come home?
Beautiful. I love that. That's very good. Is there anything else that you were hoping to talk about? If you want to, especially let people know where to find your work, and I'm going to put up a few links that I've got, and anything else that you'd like to share, please do.
Oh, thank you so much, Beth. You've been so gracious, and I've really enjoyed the conversation. I would love to just recommend that individuals explore my trilogy, my 7 trilogy of Living, Being, and Knowing. These are sacred oracles. They're not like other books. They're not books you're going to read from cover to cover. They are intended for you to open each one daily and read just a couple of lines or a short paragraph and allow that medicine to work within you. I went through a 7-year process of stillness and deeply feeling to cull this information so that you don't have to go through 7 years of stillness. You will be able to take on the subtleties that I have come to and allow them to marinate inside yourself and open you to your own insight and wisdom. It is a very powerful trilogy, and I hope that you'll get that. And the other thing that I would like to mention is a mantra that I have always used from the beginning of my work with 1111, and that is in love, of love, with love, and as love. You are in love all of the time. You are in a field of love. It is surrounding you. It is holding you. You are immersed in it. You are of love. You are composed of the molecules of love. You are comprised of love. You are with love, meaning that love has you grasped to its heart, that you are clutched within the tenderest, most sacred space, and that it is with you at all times. You are never alone. And you are here to be as love. You are the son and daughter of love. And that is your true nature. And so it is time to live, be, and know that nature as an advocate for love on the planet. Thank you for letting me spend time with you. It's been an honor and a pleasure.
That's beautiful. Likewise, for me as well. So thank you so much for making the time and receiving my invitation from maybe what might have been left field, but obviously you have a paradigm of synchronicity going on in the back end. So yeah, it's been really lovely to speak with you, Simran. I'm going to hang on for a little bit and just let people know about, we're talking about coaching. My coaching certification training is coming up starting in just under 2 weeks now with an orientation, and the classes start the week after that. There are 6 spots left. So I really got it in my head, by the way, that they need to be filled by men, that we need a balance of men and women, because all of the participants at this stage are women. And but I'm kind of letting that go and really just instead putting it out that if it's perfect for somebody at this time, and usually how people come to it is that they have done so much work on themselves and there's still something that is mysterious for them. They don't see about themselves or a next step that they want to take in their life, that it's as much about turning around and being of service and mentoring others as it is of doing your own very deep personal. It's the deepest personal transformation that people do in my world, because it's a 7-month training, extremely focused, and lots of opportunities. So there, I think I pretty much said it. If anybody wants to take me up on an application to that training, you can do that at my website, bethmartins.com. And definitely visit simran-singh.com and a few of your other websites, conversationswiththeuniverse.com. You can find her at therebelroad.com and on Twitter, Instagram, and YouTube as well at Simran Singh 1111. That's Twitter. On Instagram, it's I am Simran 1111. And on YouTube, it's at Simran Singh 1111. Maybe I'll just post that as well. So thanks again. I appreciate that you're able to make it out here. I'm going to set up my son's extra, and I would love if you guys could go and sub to my son on his YouTube channel, where he is featuring guns, knives, and guitars. So that's some mums might have gone like, "Oh no, don't talk about guns and knives and weapons." And I was luckily just waking up and not censoring him. So it's pretty cool. Where I don't know where this link is. A little mildly disorganized today. And there it is. All right. So I'm going to share that. And once again, thank you, Simran, for making the time. It's been really beautiful to speak with you. Totally appreciate it.
Thank you. And thank you to all that were here. Very grateful.
All right. Okay, everyone. Bye for now. I'm going to set up this extra. Bye, Simran. All right. Give me a minute. Let's see. How this is going to go. We got an outro. And there's Simran's channel and my son's YouTube channel as well, if you'd like to go and subscribe. All right, everyone. I look forward to seeing you next time around. You can go to the website, bethmartins.com, as well, to do an archetype quiz. Find out where on the path of purpose that you are. If you've already done it, hit me up for a link to do it again, because it's a measure of where you're at in this time, in this place, right now. And I think that's all. So we're ready to go here. And love you guys. Bye.